It's back. The Pen to Publish podcast is having two more series added, and we're excited to be talking again about all things writing and publishing. If you're planning to pen and publish, then this podcast is for you. The next two series will be covering more writing and editing tips and includes all of the issues we see repeated time and time again with new writers. The feedback from the last 6 series have been so positive, and we are being listened to as far-flung from Australia and Qatar, and now obviously Canada too. We're really excited to be coming back and bringing you more wonderful pen and writing info. Ready for your weekend listening. I'm Alexa Whitten, author, typesetter, and independent publisher, and
I'm Alexa Tewkesbury, author, editor, and proofreader. Now, we have lots of writing resources for you, which can be found on our Pen to Published website, where you'll also find all the show notes and guest information for each episode too. There's also our Writers Refinery Facebook group, which you can join. If you just look for the Writers Refinery, this is a great place to meet and interact with other writers and authors, and we'd love to see you there. And we also love getting feedback because that really helps with our rankings. So please do leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you get notified when there are new episodes available. Now, there is also the interim pity pods. Now, these are bite-sized episodes of word wisdom, so do look out for those too. Right, let's get started.
well, hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Pen to Publish podcast series 7. And today, drumroll please, we have the wonderful Sophie Hannah joining us in our special guest episode. And Alexa Tewkesbury is going to introduce Sophie with all of her accolades and what she's up to now.
Well, we are thrilled to have Sophie Hannah with us this week. Sophie is a #1 best-selling crime writer whose books are published in 51 countries and have sold millions of copies worldwide. I was first introduced to Sophie Hannah's writing by my daughter, I hasten to add, and I love it too. She won the UK National Book Awards Crime Novel of the Year prize in 2013 and the Dagger in the Library Award in 2023. She's the author of the new series of Hercule Poirot continuation novels commissioned by Agatha Christie's family. And she has also written a murder mystery musical called The Mystery of Mr. E, which premiered in London, I think in 2023, and is now available on Amazon Prime and Apple TV. And she's a best-selling poet who's been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award. She's a self-help writer, creator and host of the podcast How to Hold a Grudge, and the founder of the Dream Author coaching program for writers, which is how I became so familiar with her, because I've been part of that coaching program since it began in, I believe it was 2018, because I remember that it was going before anything like the pandemic struck. And then while the pandemic was going on, I was saying, I'm so glad I'm in this coaching program because it's really helping. and so, you know, what hasn't she done, basically? I think that's the question. What hasn't she done?
Seems like not much, I don't think, in terms of writing. There's not much more you could have done, Sophie. So anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's an honour to be here.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. So we're now going to just go through some questions that we've thought up for you. I mean, obviously, the big topic is going to be this commission that you've got to write for the Agatha Christie conglomerate of Hercule Poirot. So that's probably going to be a big number of our questions are going to probably be around that subject. But before we get into that, I would like to ask, as a writer myself and author, and something that we bang on about on our podcast a lot about, in order to be a good writer, it's essential that you're also a good reader, being a large part of the writer's journey. So would you agree with that statement, that in order to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader?
Yes, although I always sort of am wary of saying anything that's too prescriptive.
Mhm.
And I can always imagine the counter example. I can always imagine the person who has never read a single book and has been, living in a forest for their entire life, and they somehow managed to produce a work of great genius. So obviously that can happen too. But certainly, I mean, talking about me specifically, I would no way have been able to become any kind of a good writer if I hadn't been an avid reader for my entire life. My main sort of educational path towards becoming a better writer as I went along involved reading. Reading was the sort of main component of my learning what did and didn't work in terms of books, and what I liked and what I admired and what I didn't like. And I just, if I hadn't read, for example, the Brontes and Jane Austen and Iris Murdoch and Ruth Rendell and Agatha Christie, I just wouldn't have developed my own writing voice, I don't think. So yeah, for me as a writer, reading is tremendously important.
Yes. And that's what we talk about a lot, isn't it, Alexa?
Yes.
Stephen King does a lovely quote, something along the lines of, if you don't have time to read, you shouldn't be writing. So, I think it's so important that to learn and see how other writers write, being able to absorb their sort of almost their inspiration, then you can develop your own voice for sure.
And
Yeah,
it's
although
this that
even that makes it like, if I were to say to somebody, you should read widely and constantly in order to learn how to write well, that makes it sound almost a bit like, you should eat your greens and eat your vitamins because it's good for your health. I think it's equally important, and actually probably more important, if to look at it as a kind of process of inspiration, which is actually fun and kind of a bit like magic. So that's when I talk about, how I learned to become a good writer. I didn't set out to do any learning. I have read throughout my life
Hmm.
because it's one of my favorite things to do, to just lose myself in a world that someone else has brilliantly created so that I can lose myself in it and enjoy it. And when I read books that I really love and admire, some kind of magic process starts up in my brain. And it happened recently. I read back to back two novels by Nikki French, the husband and wife
Yep.
psychological crime writing team. I read their latest book, which is called The Last Days of Kira Mullen. And then it was so brilliant that I immediately read their last book, which is called Has Anyone Seen Charlotte Salter? And those books were such a brilliant reading experience for me. They kind of made some magic happen in my brain that inspired me to write a novel which actually has nothing to do with either of their novels, but I had an idea for a book I wanted to write that would hopefully make readers feel as strongly about the characters as Nikki French's books do. And there's just that kind of magic, something just takes off in your imagination when you read a great book. And if you're a creative writing type, then that often makes you think, oh, I want to write something that has the same effect on readers as what I've just read has had on me. So I think to say writers should read in order to learn how to write better, that makes it sound quite sort of disciplined and school-like, whereas actually the way if we're going to talk about shoulds, the way it should work is you read purely for pleasure. That pleasure ignites something magical in your imagination, and then you are driven in a desire way rather than a I must do the right thing way to provide that pleasure with your own writing for someone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, we should never should all over ourselves, should we? Should we? We
No,
shouldn't.
we couldn't.
Uh, Now, I was going to sort of take it in turns of asking questions, but you've actually hit on something that really forms into the another question that I have. So sorry, Alexa Tewkesbury.
No, no, no. I'm
I seem to
agog.
be hogging the light. I'm sorry, but I'd love to know how you come up with ideas. We shared a few in episode 1 of this series that we're now recording. And obviously you've just said that, you read these two books and that sort of pinged this desire to be able to write not a story that was anything like what you'd read, but you wanted to affect the reader in the same way. So, how do you come up with ideas? Like, where do they come from? Is it a myriad of places? Is it overhearing conversations when you're on the bus? Is it when you're walking or swimming or?
In terms of ideas for stories, each of my books, anything that I want to write and I'm excited enough about to write, has two points of origin. There's always two with each thing. One of them is a plotty point of origin, like I have a plot idea, usually for a mysterious hook, like what could possibly be going on here. But I'll have a plot idea, and then I will also have a kind of psychological theme idea. And when I can link one of those to the other of those, that's when everything starts to work properly. But in terms of where the plot ideas come from, almost all from real life, almost without exception. I mean, the only example I can think of that where the plot hook wasn't at all inspired by real life is my murder mystery musical that, as Alexa T said, is now a movie. And that starts with a stranger arriving at the house of the two detective characters. The two detectives are twin brothers who live together. And a stranger arrives at their house and says, "I'm the murderer." And they say to him, "What are you talking about? Is this a joke?" He says, "Not a joke." They were like, "Well, who have you murdered?" He says, "I'm the murderer." And then he leaves. And so that is kind of, I love that plot hook, because normally when there's someone there saying, "Yes, I'm the murderer," that's the end of the mystery.
Yes.
That's when it's been solved. But I like the idea of someone turning up saying, "I'm the murderer," then disappearing. And the detective characters then have to work out, is he telling the truth? Is there a murder? Who has he murdered? And they have to kind of find the murder to go with the murderer. And
Yeah.
until they do, nothing can be solved. So
Yeah.
it's like what normally is the ending of a mystery is the beginning of it. Now, that was not inspired by real life. No one has ever turned up at my
Yeah.
house and said, "I'm the murderer." But normally, my plot hooks do come very much from real life. For example, my standalone crime novel, Haven't They Grown? Which starts with a woman seeing two children that she hasn't seen for 12 years. When she last saw them, they were 5 and 3 years old. She sees them again 12 years later, and they still look 5 and 3 years old. They haven't grown any taller. They look exactly as they did 12 years ago. They're even wearing the same clothes they were wearing when she last saw them 12 years ago. So why haven't they grown? And that's a very, she knows that that is actually impossible. She knows that children do, in fact, always grow. And yet she also knows that she is not an unreliable narrator, and that she has seen what she thinks she's seen. And she even heard their mother calling them by their names, their mother who did look 12 years older. So, she's in no doubt of what she saw, and yet she knows it's impossible. Now, that seems like a really outlandish and unlikely and unique plot premise, but it was inspired by real life in the following way. I was taking my son to a football match that he was playing in, and it was an away match. So we had to go to a place about half an hour from where we lived. And I knew that one of my friends, who I hadn't seen for over 10 years, had recently bought not only a house there, but a mansion. I'd never seen this mansion, but she'd sent me her new address card, and I was in no doubt that it was a massive mansion. And then when I saw that my son was playing football there, I thought, oh, while he's having his football match, I'll go and have a nosy at the mansion. So I did, and it was indeed a massive mansion. And I sat outside it and looked at it and thought, aha, there it is. And then as I drove away, I thought to myself, would have been a bit weird if if their gates had opened at that point and they'd come out and found me sitting outside their house. Because I didn't feel like I could turn up and say hello after not really being in touch for that long. So I was driving off sort of thinking, oh, that would have been a bit weird if they'd opened the gates and all come out. And then I realized that in my imagining of that scene, them coming out, which never happened, right? But I was imagining it as I drove away. And in my imagining, their two children were 5 and 3 years old, as they had been when I'd last seen them. So then I kind of made a mental correction and went, oh, obviously they'd be like 17 and 15 now. And if I wasn't a crime writer, I would have probably left it at that. But because I am a crime writer, my next idea was, hang on a minute, but what if they'd
Mm.
come out the gates and the children were still 5 and 3 years old, or looked as if they were? What would I do then? Because
Mm.
I realized that I'd imagined this scene that could never have happened because the kids were by that point.
I mean, did you quickly write it down on a bit of paper before you lost it, or did you start working out the story in your head?
I didn't quickly write it down because I was driving, I didn't have a bit of paper, but I knew I would not forget that idea. The minute I had that idea, I thought that is the perfect hook for a
Mm.
psychological thriller. And how I knew it was perfect was I was as intrigued as I wanted readers to be. Like, my next thought was, well, why would that ever happen? We don't want to do anything silly like make it that they're aliens or ghosts or they've taken a weird drug, none of that nonsense. How can this hook be made to work in a realistic way that isn't anticlimactic at all?
Mm.
And I couldn't think of a way. And so then I was really intrigued and I thought there must be a way for this to be a mystery with a satisfying solution that makes sense. And then I was properly hooked. And I also had my psychological uh, theme side of the inspiration because for ages I realized I had been, my kids then were younger than they are now. Now they're, post school, post university, but in those days they were both at school. And I had often found myself in situations where things happened in the families and households of their friends and acquaintances, their schoolmates. And I would occasionally, not often, but occasionally find myself thinking, do I need to do anything? Like, should I intervene there? It sounds as though something quite bad is going on in that household. And every time I said to my husband, do you think we ought to do anything? He would go, no, 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 I'm very sure we don't need to do anything, and especially not me. So he was always of the view that we should be polite and mind our own business. Whereas he's very, I mean, just naturally, he always wants to mind his own business. He has the opposite of FOMO. Fear of missing out. He always says he suffers from phobia, FOBI, which is fear of being involved. Whereas I am quite nosy and curious and also kind of more interested in the particulars of what's going on in other people's households and relationships. So I kept thinking, well, surely we need to do something. This doesn't sound good, what's going on in that house, or, that our children have told us about or that we've heard about. So the theme that I linked up with my haven't they grown premise about these children who haven't apparently aged was the theme of, at what point does polite minding of one's own business, which is great, cross over into negligent bystanderism, where you negligently allow bad things to happen under the guise of, oh, well, it's none of my business. And that was a theme that I really wanted to explore. So that was like the perfect cocktail. But that's an example of how all my ideas come from real life pretty much, but I add the bits that turn them into thrillers. So, like, I've never seen any children who haven't grown. I've never had any dealings with any real life murders. So it's always the stuff around the murder plot that's the autobiographical bit, not the actual murders themselves.
Yeah.
That's so interesting hearing you say that, because I read that book. I love that book. And
Thank you.
honestly, people who are listening, if you haven't read that book, do read it because it goes where you don't expect. And I remember seeing you, Sophie, at it was an event at Greenway, Agatha Christie's home in South Devon. And I asked, I think it was just after the Dream Author program had launched, and I asked you how you worked out these twists, because you're just such a genius at twists. And you said something along the lines of, it's what my brain is trained to do. My brain is just trained. All I need to do is, because I've been doing this for so long, what I need to do now is ask it, right, I need a brilliant twist here. What can you come up with? And so your brain is kind of working away in the background to find that. And I suppose that's like with your with your like how day-to-day details of your life, something will crop up, and because your brain is so switched on to writing a story around it, you're able to think, oh, and you're really alert to it, and then your brain does its clever weaving and comes up with what you want it to.
Yeah, I mean, what I've started to believe, and I started some time ago because I just noticed it was true. In the old days, when I first started writing, I would, if I had what I thought was a brilliant plot premise, but I couldn't think of an ending, and that happened with my first ever crime novel, Little Face, which starts with a woman insisting that the baby in her house has been swapped for another baby and is not her baby. She insists that while she was out for a couple of hours, somebody, for whatever reason, swapped her baby for a different baby. Her husband, meanwhile, insists that this didn't happen and that she's lying or crazy. And I remember when I had that idea, which was basically husband and wife cannot agree about whether the baby in the house is theirs or not. I was slightly worried about, like, would I be able to think of a reason why this would happen and a satisfying solution? And I feared I wouldn't. And then with my fourth crime novel, The Other Half Lives, actually, I should say I did think of a brilliant solution to Little Face, which I love and I was so pleased with, but I still didn't take it for granted that there would always be a satisfying solution to a really mysterious premise. And then again, with my fourth crime novel, The Other Half Lives, which starts with a man confessing to the murder of a woman who isn't dead. But no matter how hard the police try to convince him that he can't possibly have murdered her because, look, here she is alive and well, he just keeps insisting that whatever they think they know, they are wrong because he killed her 7 years ago. And with that one, again, I was like, I'm never going to be able to make this work in a way that isn't a massive disappointment. And then it took
Like
about
she's
six
got a
months.
twin sister that no one knew about and
Exactly,
changed her name or something. Yeah.
exactly. For about 6 to 9 months, I couldn't think of any way to make that work. And then one day an idea occurred to me, and I was like, that's how it can work. And then after that, I just started to believe that whatever I wanted to work, if I loved an idea enough, I could make it work. And then when you believe something, I mean, as Alexa T will tell you, this is what I'm constantly banging on about in the Dream Author program. When you believe something, you get to work to make it come true.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I've never had a plot thing that I couldn't solve or an idea that I couldn't make work. But that's because I have this fundamental belief that if I want it to work, then it can work.
Yeah.
And that kind of instructs my brain and my imagination to get to work to solve that thing.
Yeah.
So my brain knows because I've told it so thoroughly and so often that
Yeah.
its job is to think of amazing plot premises and then think of brilliant ways to solve them.
There's a lovely analogy that Alexa Tewksbury says on that episode 1 that we talk about, where you seed an idea. And I think this sums it up beautifully because when you buy I've suddenly got into gardening. My mum's a great gardener, and I've suddenly kind of got to that age where, I love watching birds on the feeder and, gardening and all the rest of it. And I think it's right. It's like when you buy a bulb for a plant, when you plant it, you never ever think, well, I hope it really blooms. You just know it will because that's what plants do. And it's almost like that's what you've got with your ideas. You know that once you've seeded the idea, you have this ultimate belief that that idea will bloom, however long it takes,
Yeah,
it will bloom.
exactly. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So there's a very much then a air of confidence in yourself as a writer. And rather than worry, you don't. You just have this belief that this will happen. And I think
Yeah,
that's a
absolutely. Absolutely. I never worry. So at the moment, I've got a brilliant, I would call it a brilliant half idea. And it's so brilliant. I love it so much that I want to do it under a pseudonym. I want it to be auctioned in the UK and the US and sell for millions of dollars. Like that's how sure I am that the right version of it will have huge appeal. but I've only got, I would say, about half of what I need at the moment. There are still lots of things that remain to be figured out, but I never for a second worry that that won't happen. I just know with 100% certainty I'm going to figure it out. It's coming to me in dribs and drabs. What I've got already, I absolutely love. And there's what I've got already includes loads of questions about should I do it this way and should it be this? Should it be that? I don't know whether it should be at all crimey or suspensey or not at all crimey or suspensey. I don't know whether I don't know how sort of literary it should be and how commercial it can be. So there's so much that needs to be figured out. But in my head, it is just a done deal that that book is being written, being finished, being hugely successful. Yeah, there's just no doubt in my mind about that. And I mean, I guess the doubt is I don't know that it will go to auction and get millions of dollars, but it doesn't matter whether it does or doesn't. What I know is that if I believe that it will, then that will inspire me even more to write it as well as I can, because I'll be writing the huge big deal book that's going to sell for millions. Therefore, I will up level my
Yeah.
writing. Once
Yeah.
I've up leveled my writing and created that brilliant book, then I will no longer care how much it sells for, because the book itself will be the prize.
Wow.
This leads on brilliantly. We won't going to actually talk about the Dream Author Coaching Program quite yet, but this leads on so brilliantly to that, because that's such a thrust of it.
Mm.
So is it your belief in that for yourself? Is that what made you want to launch the Dream Author Coaching Program?
Yes, exactly. So I started to notice that writers that I spoke to at every level of experience, from mega best-selling, hugely successful, to just written the first chapter of their first book and never been published, I started to notice that writers in general were believing and thinking all these things that were making them more miserable and more frustrated than they needed to be. And they were mistaking their thoughts and beliefs for the reality of their situation. Um, and you see it all the time. I mean, the other day I was listening to a sort of friend of mine. He's an online friend. I don't really know him that well in real life, but I really like him online, and we chat all the time on social media. And so I saw that he was being interviewed on a podcast in connection with his day job. And so I listened to the podcast, and just at the end of this interview about nothing to do with writing, the interviewer said to him, "Oh, and I believe you're self-publishing your novel soon. And you've written this novel and you're going to self-publish it. Why did you decide to self-publish rather than traditional publishing?" And so he went on to explain why he decided that. And then, just as a sort of aside, he said, "I mean, no one makes money from writing novels. No one makes money from publishing novels." And then he carried on to say, "But I want to do it anyway," sort of thing. And I just thought, that's such a perfect example of why I created Dream Author. And I had to restrain myself from immediately messaging him and going, "Join Dream Author," because of course it isn't true that nobody makes money from writing novels. And I am an example of someone who has made money from writing novels, and I could name another 100 writers
Mm.
who have made money from writing novels. So it's just not true. But writers, like all humans, tend to believe negative thoughts that aren't at all true. And then they use those thoughts, which they've mistaken for the facts, they use them to discourage themselves. And once they're discouraged, then they don't try anymore to achieve the thing they want. And I realized that by some lucky fluke of like my natural personality, I had a tendency always, and I had for all my life had a tendency to look for the best possible thought that was plausible in any situation, and to believe that instead of the less positive one. So, for example, when I was starting out trying to get published as a novelist, which I started when I was about 16, sending out novels and trying to get published, and I got like, I'm sure, 40 to 60 rejection letters between the ages of 16 and 20. But I never made it mean, "I can't do this. This is never going to work. I'm not good enough." I never made it mean that. I always thought, clearly one day I'm going to be really successful as a writer. Isn't it frustrating that these people aren't helping me to make that happen, So, but I never thought it won't happen. I should give up. And so because I had like the most positive thoughts that were consistent with getting loads of rejections, which were basically like, this isn't working yet, it isn't working yet, but it's definitely going to work, but it's just frustrating that it isn't working now. That was about the level of my thoughts. But that element of it's definitely going to work was what kept me trying, even though it was really painful when I got those rejection letters. Whereas so many writers get 10 to 20 rejections and think, oh, well, clearly it's not going to work. And that's just not true, but they think it's true. And when they join Dream Author, because you can get coaching on anything or any time in Dream Author. And whenever anyone says, clearly it's never going to work, I always say, no, 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 we don't know that because that is in the future. All we know is these X number of people have said no.
Yeah.
Now, that might be an upsetting fact, but it's not as upsetting as what you've made it mean, which is my dream can never come true and I might as well give up. That is what Dream Author coaching is all about.
Wow. So mindset is such an important, I mean, we can take what you've just said there and apply it to every aspect of our life, couldn't we?
Yeah.
100%. So for example, I coached a woman in the last group coaching call in Dream Author about whether she should move house now or move house later. And did she love her current house or did she dislike it? And would she love the one she's trying to buy? And it was really interesting coaching her because I am currently looking to buy a house. I am in the middle of viewing houses, making offers on houses. And my husband and I have just made an offer on a house this morning. When we viewed that house, I thought to myself, but do I love this aspect and do I love that aspect? And then I had a kind of realization as I was coaching this Dream Author. I thought, we don't have to sit around wondering or waiting to observe whether we love a particular thing or not. We can just decide that we are going to love it, right? So this house we've made an offer on is literally on the side of a mountain. So you go up a mountain through a forest. We wanted secluded, and it delivers big time on the secluded front. You can't see another house at all from any part of this house or its garden. It's on the side of a mountain. The garden is kind of in like, I don't know what you call it. It's not like a big flat lawn. It's like there's like a bit of garden, then you go down and there's another bit. It's kind of
Terraced, almost terrace gardens.
Sorry, yes, this is how much of a gardener I'm not. I don't even know how to describe a garden, let alone create one. So it's a terrace garden. It's on the side of a mountain. There's no other houses around. And it felt a bit weird, even though we wanted secluded. And then I just decided, but I can just decide to love it. I can decide that I love being on the side of a mountain in the middle of a forest. Like, what's not to love? And then so then I just decided that was my chosen attitude. And within about an hour or two, I just adored this house and everything about it because I'd just decided on purpose that I was no longer going to think the thought, the best kind of houses have totally flat, square gardens.
Right.
Like, that's not the truth. It's not a fact in the world.
No.
If I had continued to think it on any level, I would have deprived myself of the chance to get a house that in every other way was perfect. And why would I want to do that? So now I've decided that I prefer terraced gardens on the sides of mountains. And that's what
It's funny because I was talking to Alexa Tewksbury just before we got on the call about I've just recently moved to Canada.
Oh, right. Oh, brilliant.
And Alexa was saying, "How are you?" And I'm like, I'm okay." And it's like I showed her my view, which is stunning, right? I've got the Olympic Mountains in the distance. I can see the sea.
Wow.
I mean, stunning.
Wow.
But for whatever reason, I'm sort of feeling, and you've just absolutely made such a good point because Alexa said, you need to speak to Sophie Hannah 'cause she's brilliant about things like this. And your encapsulation of decide to be happy is so simple and so uncomplicated that
Yeah.
you're
So I would say,
absolutely right. Just make the decision that
yes,
you're happy.
I would say it depends. In every situation, it's different. So for me, I had to decide, did I want to love that house and everything about it and make an offer, which I
Hmm.
didn't have to do. I could have decided, no, actually, it's not quite right. I'm going to decide to hold out for something else. But I just really wanted to love that house and try and buy that house. I just felt this kind of, that was what my inner wisdom was telling me to
Right.
do. So I just went all in on it. And we might not get it. It's not in the bag. We've made an offer we haven't heard back.
It's
And
what
it's
your gut was telling you to
yeah,
go for.
I thought, how would I feel if someone else
Mm.
got that house? And I went, well, that can't happen. So that was how I knew I wanted it. But in your situation, I mean, I don't know why you've moved to Canada, but what the first thing I'd do is ask myself, is there a decision to be made? Like, is it a choice between stay in Canada or go back to England? If
Mm.
that's a choice you want to make, then absolutely be free to make that choice. But if the being in Canada is a done deal, like you're there and you've decided, decision made, you're in Canada, then there's absolutely nothing to lose by just deciding to love
Mm.
everything about
Mm.
your house, your view,
Mm.
and
Mm.
just like sell yourself on that. Like, oh my God, look at this incredible view. Isn't
Mm.
it amazing to be in Canada?
Mm.
And that works.
Mm.
So often we think that we have to, wait and see if we like something or not. And occasionally that obviously is true. But very often when we don't even realize it, it's not a matter of waiting to see. We can just decide that we're going to love that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
I,
that. I love
I
that.
did
I
it in
love this
relation.
whole mindset of I am going to be a great author one day and
Totally. Yeah.
making that decision and believing it. And then you will do the steps to get there. Now, I'm not saying that
Yes.
anyone can be a great author by putting any rubbish just because you believe it on a piece of paper, it's going to whatever. But when you believe it, you then do the steps that then take
Exactly.
you to
When
that
you believe
place.
it, you feel great and empowered and creative, and then you do the work and
Yeah.
become a better writer all the time. And the passion goes into the work, and that communicates
Mm.
itself to readers. And also, you have a much nicer day-to-day experience. I mean, in Dream Author, we talk a lot about experiential results as well as achievement results. So I've written this musical that's become a movie. I've also written another musical that hasn't done much yet, but will do a lot eventually. And I just firmly believe that both of those musicals one day are going to be as famous and successful as Hamilton. Now, has that happened yet? Absolutely not. But because I believe it will,
Mm.
I'm already thinking and feeling, oh yeah, my musicals are as successful as Hamilton. I mean, in the future, but that's a detail, I can be happy about it now. But it enables me to have brilliant experiential results. And I think it's a shame when people miss out on that opportunity. And given that we don't know what the future holds, right? We don't know our work could be read by millions of people or for people in 100 years' time. We have no way of knowing. So why not guess in the positive, optimistic way rather than in the negative way that most people call being realistic? And the two most brilliant examples of the wisdom of that approach are F. Scott Fitzgerald and Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, both
Right.
of whom died thinking their careers were massive fails. F. Scott Fitzgerald thought The Great Gatsby was a complete flop. No one had bought it, no one liked it. Then after his death, it becomes one of the most celebrated novels ever. And Van Gogh died without making any money or having his art recognized. Now he's one of the most revered painters ever. So they could have had so much fun and happiness in their lives. They just
Yes.
decided to believe that they're going to be super famous and brilliant one day. And it sounds crazy. Like people, if you adopt this approach as I do, many, many people will tell you you're deluded. But my opinion is that if we decide we're going to be successful or unsuccessful in the future, we're deluded either way because we just don't know what we're going to be in the future. And so why not be positively deluded rather than negatively deluded? Because it feels so much better and then you create so much better results.
I love that.
Mm. I do. I'm so excited by all of this coaching, and I haven't. I think I've asked for coaching a couple of times, but just when you listen to the people that other people are bringing and asking questions on, and Sophie's advice, and you think, oh, I can apply that. Of course, that works in the way I was thinking about that, and I find it so exciting because every webinar I listen to, or just everything I listen to, and I go back and listen to stuff over again, there's always something in there that I think, oh yeah, that's brilliant. I'll make a little note of it. And so if I catch myself thinking in a certain way, I think, no, hang on, what was that? And I can remind myself. And you talk about in the program, you talk about the importance of the language we use when we're thinking about our writing and about how we view our struggles. Because I know sometimes you'll read out an email from somebody and they'll have said, oh, can't think of a other than struggles. It's just such a struggle, and you'll say we're going to come back to that word in a minute, that word struggle, and then read the rest of the email. So if a writer's giving themselves a hard time because they're not achieving their daily word count for whatever reason, or they feel they're failing because every time they sit down and write they procrastinate, how should they reframe their thinking about those perceived problems so that they see them differently?
Well, I mean, the first thing is the first thing we can all do is just decide, and it will be hard for some people, but we can just make it a rule. We're never going to beat ourselves up about anything ever again. If we haven't done our word count, if we've lain in bed looking at Rightmove or watching Netflix or, looking
Doom
on Instagram,
scrolling, yes, guilty.
whatever, bitching about somebody within a WhatsApp group, whatever we've been doing instead of our word count, instead of giving ourselves a hard time and making it a problem, we can just go, of course, I'm human. Of course, I don't want to do my work. No one wants to do their work in the moment. Our brains always want to do the easy thing. And so we just decide we're never giving ourselves a hard time about it. Then we get to look at what we're doing and not doing without that kind of heavy, moral, judgmental sensibility. We're just like, okay, I want to write this book. I want to achieve this or do that. How am I going to approach that? I notice that I often don't get down to work when I have the time available, and I often kind of avoid the work. So how can I solve that tendency without any blame or judgment or telling myself I'm useless, but instead by going, it's totally understandable and natural. You don't want to sit down and take the plunge into what you feel might be hard work. Totally understandable. So let yourself off every moral hook. Just leave the sort of judgmental side out of it completely and be really kind to yourself. So what I would do, and I do this with myself, I'm like, oh, do you not fancy working today? Of course. That's so understandable. Look, do we actually ever want to work ever again? It's fine if we don't. Maybe we never want to write another word or do any work ever. But then I answer myself and go, like, because I've asked myself the question non-judgmentally, like, are you sure you don't want to stop work forever? Because that's fine if you do. We just need to decide. But then my other part of my brain will answer and go, no, I definitely want to do this, that, and the other. It's just that I don't want to do it right now. And that's because of this or that. And if there's a good reason for not wanting to do it right now, then I will let myself have a rest. But if it's just the kind of usual, it would be easier to do something else, but I kind of do want to do it really, then I'll go, okay, so maybe now's a time when we could do some work. And you just sort of be kind and reasonable with yourself rather than judgmental. And yeah, be really careful about not about the thoughts you have, because thoughts just pop up. We cannot control what thoughts arrive in our brain. So those thoughts that are unhelpful will continue to appear. Why am I so lazy and useless? I'm never going to finish this book. They just pop up because our brains are like unruly toddlers in a department store. We have to keep them firmly disciplined, otherwise they'll just run amok and cause all kinds of trouble. So what we do is, what I recommend in Dream Author is, never kind of choose a thought or own it as like my thought just because it's appeared in your head. If a thought appears in your head, it's not yet your thought, it's just a thought that your brain is presenting to you. And I like to use this system that I teach in Dream Author called thought auditions, where we imagine that we are the casting director of a thought show. And every thought that pops up in our brain has come into the audition hall to do its audition. And if we like that thought and think that to cast it as the leading role in our thought show is going to make our thought show brilliant and successful, then we can cast it in the main part. But if we think it's going to make our thought show a bit of a failure, then we say, thank you very much for coming in. I'm afraid you were not successful on this occasion, and we send it on its way. Okay, so a thought like, I'm so useless, I've procrastinated again. Why do I never do what I say I'm going to do? I'm never going to be able to finish a book because I'm so lazy. All these thoughts that writers punish themselves with, just audition them, and they are not going to improve anybody's thought show. So we just like notice that the thought has come up, and then we go, thank you very much. I'm afraid you failed the audition. Off you go. And then they're not our thoughts. They're just thoughts that have passed across our mind. Then that leaves the field free for us to choose the very thoughts that will help us and inspire us and get us to have a great experience and great writing results. So thoughts like, I can do anything I want to do tomorrow, spend my time however I want to spend it, become someone who finishes everything I start if I want to, because whatever happens has happened in the past, the future is still totally up for grabs.
Love it. It's almost like a dream catcher, isn't it? So you're allowing the bad thoughts, the negative thoughts, the unhelpful thoughts, let's call them that, to pass through. And then anything that is putting us forward to our dream, we're going to catch that and we're going to keep it and we're going to use that as the spotlight.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for example, one thing that comes up quite a lot, I've got several dream authors who have had one book that has been spectacularly successful. I can think of three in particular, three dream authors, each of whom has published several books, but in each of their cases, one of their books was like a mega sort of phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And what they often worried about before they joined Dream Author was like, what if I never have another book as successful as that? And when they spoke to their agents about that very worry, what their agents, without exception, I think, said to them was, well, of course, that book was such a huge phenomenon. You probably will never have another one as big as that, but it doesn't matter. You can still be.
Yes.
And I said, okay, that's a thought. You could audition that thought. I'll probably never have another book as successful as that one, but it doesn't matter. I can still have loads of success. Is that going to totally destroy your thought show? Maybe not. But a far better thought, in my opinion, to cast in the leading role is, of course, I'm going to publish a book one day that's going to be even more successful. That book was a mega phenomenon. It was super successful. And one day, one of my books is going to be even more successful than that. Why not think that, What's the downside? And then you get excited. And it's not that you think any success that isn't huge success doesn't count. It's that you quite reasonably think, if I can create this level of success and I'm always evolving and growing as a writer, why would it make sense to believe that I can't achieve even greater success? That just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't matter whether I actually do achieve greater success or not. What matters is that I keep telling myself the truth about the future, which is that I absolutely could write a book with an even bigger hit than the hit before. When I first published Little Face, my first crime novel, it became a huge success. And I could easily have thought I'll never have a success as big as this again, but I didn't. I thought, and I'll go on to bigger successes. Then I published my first Poirot novel. That was an even bigger success than Little Face. Then I published Haven't They Grown, which was an even bigger success than my first crime novel. So I just look at that and go, well, yeah, one day I'm going to write a book that's a super mega phenomenon and sells 5 million copies in its first month. Because, like, it does, it's not that I think that is factually going to happen. I have no idea. And everyone would tell me, and I'm sure it's true, that the odds are against that happening. But what I know is that it doesn't harm me in any way, all my books, if I believe that and work to make that happen. Nothing bad happens. And a lot of people don't understand that part because they say, well, surely something bad might happen because if you tell yourself you're going to write a book that sells 5 million copies in a month and then that never happens, well, then you're going to be really disappointed. And I always think when people say that, that just shows that they really don't get it. Because if you adopt the approach that I adopt, the believing in the future results that you're going to create is so exciting, especially because you're not there yet. You know, people think, oh, it's not, it can't make you happy if you haven't achieved it yet. I think the opposite. It's precisely the fact that you have to strive for it and you haven't got it yet, but you absolutely believe you can and will get it. For me, that's the best possible result that any writer can have. That is the prize. Having achieved anything already isn't the prize. The most exciting things are the ones we haven't achieved yet, but believe we can. And so, you know, if I'm on my deathbed when I'm 117 and someone goes, oh, you never did, you know, your musicals never did become as successful as Hamilton, and you never did write a book that sold 5 million, you know, I expect you feel like a big failure. I'd just be like, you have no clue what you're on about. Because the way I feel and think at any given time, it's all about success, and I enjoy it as if the successes were already in the bag, and I produce better work and better results because of that. And that is the success. So when I say any particular goal, it's never really about actually making that very thing happen. It's about a way of living that feels the most fulfilling, the most happy, and the most creative. And that's the success.
It's like Schrodinger's author, you know, you are a success. You are a success that you just in a box and you just haven't got there yet, but you are. Like
Yes.
you are in the
Yes.
future. You just haven't lived it yet.
Yes.
You believe in that future result as if it
Yeah.
were already
Real.
there,
Yeah.
and you live from it. So you
Mm.
think and feel as if it was already in the bag.
Yeah.
Then that that so this is what one dream author said that absolutely blew her mind when I put it in this particular way. The thoughts and feelings that you imagine you would have
Yeah.
when you achieved your wildest dream
Yeah.
goal, those are the very thoughts and feelings you need
Yeah.
in order to
Get
achieve your
there.
dreams
Yeah.
goal.
They
Yeah.
talk about that for sports people, for people who I think is it Paul McKenna? He talks about that as well.
Right. Yeah.
It's all about this. You need to actually feel as the person that you want to be in order to get to that place. And
Yeah.
athletes do it all the time, don't they? I think was it Mark Peters that wrote The Chimp Paradox? Was it Mark Peters?
I don't know, but I know the book you mean.
Yeah, he talks also about the thoughts in your head and how you need to, like, kind of what you do, audition them and get rid of the ones that don't serve you. Like, what's the point in allowing a negative thought any space in your head? If it's not serving you,
Exactly.
get rid of it.
Exactly.
Talking about all of this, because obviously we've got a list of questions here, but obviously I'm going to pick the questions that obviously suit what we're talking about. So I've got one here is, what's the most frustrating thing about writers then in terms of bad habits? Obviously, it's probably not about necessarily the writing. It's probably all about mindset, would you say? The writers that you deal with or the writers in general?
Well, I don't really find it frustrating. So I have huge bad habits myself, but in terms of frustration with other writers, I don't feel frustration. So when I encounter writers, let's say I encounter a writer with a whole string of bad habits, I never feel frustrated because A, I am a writer with a whole string of bad habits, and B, I just think that, every single human is very flawed and behaves ridiculously on a regular basis. And so the way I like to interpret that is that that is how we humans are meant to be. We are not meant to be perfect productivity machines. We're meant to be as we are. And that's why we all are flawed and running around with strange fears, delusions, and preoccupations. It's not a design fault. We are meant to be this way. So I much prefer to think, like, isn't it like I kind of have huge affection for all of our foibles and weird habits and bad habits, and as I say, I have so many myself, and I'm very tolerant and patient and accepting of my own,
Mhm.
because I have discovered that being judgmental with myself, if anything, makes me have even more bad habits. If I were to give myself a good talking to about all the things I do wrong as a writer, I'd feel hard done by, and then I'd go and like eat a massive pizza and a load of ice cream, and then I'd go and like smoke a couple of cigarettes and get drunk. Whereas if I'm totally accepting of all my flaws, then it encourages me to want to do better. So my approach to just about everything in life is all carrot and no stick, basically. And in terms of my own bad habits, I mean, wow, I am the biggest procrastinator. I'm always in a kind of panic, urgent deadline situation because I've spent 4 weeks ignoring the work that I knew I had to do.
Mhm.
I am what I like to call a negligent optimist. I'm so firmly believing that the best case scenario
Love that.
is,
Yeah.
I so believe that everything will be fine
Yeah.
that I sometimes allow things not to be fine. Like there have been so many times when my husband will come into the room and go, our train leaves in 5 minutes. And I go, yeah, I know, we'll easily make it. He'll go, but you're in your pajamas and the station is 8 minutes away. It's almost like I've sold myself so effectively that everything's going to be fine and brilliant that
Right.
I sometimes, you know, forget to get dressed and go and catch my train. I just assume everything will work out somehow. And my husband is very good at going, no, this is one of those occasions where everything won't work out unless you do the thing you need to
Yeah.
do.
But I bet 9 times out of 10 it does work out. The train's late or
Yeah.
you are able to
Nine,
get to the station because it's your mindset. One
nine
quick
times out
tip
of 10.
on procrastinate on because this is will be a big thing for writers because I know you've got to go. You've been so generous with your time. And I haven't asked the questions that I've got
No,
from fans,
and we
but
haven't
I
talked
think
about Agatha Christie.
I think this is so important.
Well,
I
I will
actually
come
think this
back.
is
If
so
you
important.
want,
Oh,
I'll
that would be
come back
lovely. Yes,
and do
please.
another one
About
where
all
we
the
can have
boring questions
I'll
about
do
Agatha
I'll
Christie.
do a part two.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Procrastination. Just let's end on that. What is your biggest way of overcoming procrastination?
Okay, well, I think even asking it in that way misses a bit of potentially helpful information. So if you are someone who procrastinates, as I am, and as many writers are, the first thing to do is not just try to overcome it, because procrastination is arising in order to give us useful information. Anything we do, whether it's something we want to do or something we wish we didn't do, there's always some goodies in it for us that we can learn from. So before anyone tries to conquer or get rid of their procrastination, I would recommend they welcome it into their life. So start by saying, okay, procrastination, I've always been hard on you and talked about you as though I wished you'd leave me alone, but actually welcome, because you've been around for ages. You and I are good mates now. We hang out together a lot.
Mm.
Tell me, why do we hang out together a lot? Like, what's going on when you turn up?
Yeah.
And I mean, in Dream Author, I very, very often coach on this because people procrastinate for different reasons.
Mm.
And so if you investigate your procrastination and talk to it and find out what's behind it, then you can start to see what it's trying to guide you towards. And then you can do whatever you want to do once you realize what you're being invited to pay attention to. And then you won't have to conquer procrastination
Right.
because you'll understand what you need a lot better and what the procrastination was trying to tell you. And I know exactly why I procrastinate. The reason I still have procrastination in my life is because I haven't yet changed the things I know I would need to change in order for procrastination not to be a thing. And I am going to change those things, but for various practical reasons, I can't quite yet. But yeah, instead of seeing procrastination initially as a problem to be solved, see it as something that is helpfully turning up to give you an important message, and then ask yourself, what might that message be? And I mean, obviously, this goes without saying, if anyone wants help with this in Dream Author, Dream Author is a completely open program. You can join it at any time on the Dream Author website. There's a page that says enroll now, and you can sign up, and I will coach you on your individual procrastination issues.
Wonderful.
And it honestly, it is so worth it. I have Sophie Hannah in my ear so much of the week. So much of the week.
Sophie, how can people get in touch with you? And yes, we will definitely grab on taking you for part 2, where we can ask all the authory questions about Agatha Christie and all the rest of it. How can people get in touch with you? How can people
get in touch with me at my email address, which I'm just looking up now. You'd think I'd know it by now. It's Sophie, Sophie, DA Coach, which is short for Dream Author Coach, Sophie DA Coach, all lowercase, at gmail.com.
Wonderful. And do you have a website as well where people can go and
do.
find your stuff?
I have 2 websites. My author website is sophiehannah.com. That's where you can find Haven't They Grown, links to watch my musical, all that kind of thing. And then my Dream Author website for coaching is dreamauthorcoaching.com.
Wonderful. Sophie, you have been amazing. I'm going away with so many tidbits from this, in just terms of mindset is such a huge part of this.
It really is. And it's, as you said at the beginning, it's a huge part of everything. It really is. I mean, once you realize, and this goes for writers and everybody, once you realize that your life and your experience and everything that you've got is created primarily by your own thoughts and beliefs, that gives you so much freedom and power over your own life. It really is incredible.
And it's really exciting to hear someone say that, because it doesn't occur to you, and someone says it, you think, oh, this wonderful revelation. Yes.
Yeah. And one thing I notice, and I find it quite funny, but also a bit sad, is that so many people in sort of official capacities or unofficially who try to help writers start out by saying really unhelpful things. So you hear so many people going, obviously it's really difficult and awful and sad for writers these days, and I want to help writers because of that. And I'm like, well, you've just told them it's awful and difficult and sad. That's not helpful, because it's not true. Like,
yeah.
We all sort of accept that, oh, it's so hard for writers these days. Actually, there are more routes to finding readers than there ever have been.
Yeah, definitely.
The field is more open than it ever has been. And at every point in human history, there have been good and bad aspects of any set of circumstances. So I always, and it's the same with everything, I get so many emails at the moment which begin with, hello, hope you're doing okay in these devastatingly depressing times. And I always bristle, because I'm like, hang on a minute, look, we used to burn people at the stake. We used to hang children for stealing loaves of bread. I mean, I didn't personally, I should hasten to add, but these were things that happened. People routinely sort of couldn't have a bath for 2 weeks and starved in the streets. And in so many ways, things are brilliantly miles better than they ever used to be. And at any time in history, there have been people having an awful time and people having a perfectly lovely time. And that will always be true. So I just always reject the suggestion that we're in a particularly bad period of history, because, look at the Middle Ages. And it's
Yeah.
the same with writers. I'm sure writers in 1933 or 1921 frequently thought, oh, why will no one publish my
Well,
novel? It's all doom and
women
gloom.
women had to write under a man's
Right,
name.
exactly.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
the absolute ridiculousness of what the Brontes had to go through
Yeah.
just because they were
Yes.
women, you
Yeah.
know. So yeah, it's really important to choose and sort of curate our thoughts and beliefs on purpose, knowing that good thoughts will make us feel better, which will lead to much better actions and results.
Love that. That quote I am going to write out and stick on my wall because that is definitely a quote to live by. Sophie, thank you
Yes.
so much. You've been so generous with your
You're
time.
very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been just lovely to talk to you, and our listeners are going to love it.
Yeah, this is going to be
Brilliant.
Thank
such
you.
a helpful episode, and
Oh,
we would
brilliant. Oh,
definitely
thank
love to
you.
have you back. So thank
Okay.
you. We've got questions about
Fabulous.
Poirot, and I've got questions too from someone that's read all of your books, including Poirot as well, who has got a very nerdy question for you. So we will leave that for part two. Anyway, thank you, Sophie, so
Thank
much.
You're
you.
welcome. I'd better go and rush off to the car.
Yes.
But lovely to chat to you both, and
Thank
thank you
you.
Okay,
for
And
having
to
me
you.
on.
speak soon.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay,
Bye.
take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.